On the morning of December 18, 1997, the world awoke to a headline that seemed almost impossible. Chris Farley was dead. Not in a distant accident, not after years of illness, but alone in the quiet confines of his Chicago apartment. The man who had commanded stages, who had made audiences roar with laughter, was gone. The shock was immediate and crushing. Fans who had once watched him tumble across SNL's stage, his body a hurricane of energy and joy, could scarcely reconcile that vitality with the stillness that now filled the room. Headlines screamed disbelief, cameras swarmed outside, and the laughter he had gifted to the world became a haunting echo of absence. Colleagues who had leaned on him for timing, for the precision that made every sketch sparkle, now struggled to articulate the void he left behind. Chris had been the glue, the one who held scenes together without stealing the spotlight, the calm amid chaos, the anchor for every wild performer around him. And now, in the cruelest irony, the life of the man who held so much together had unraveled in solitude. Police photographs captured a room eerily still, a stark contrast to the chaotic vitality that had defined his life on screen. The apartment, once filled with laughter and warmth, now carried a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls themselves. The world was forced to confront a reality that no one wanted to see. A beloved figure, larger than life, rendered powerless in the most private of spaces. This was not just the death of a comedian. This was the collapse of a symbol, a heartbeat that had once set the rhythm for millions. Yet the public image Chris Farley had cultivated for years could not have seemed more different from the tragedy that unfolded behind closed doors. On camera, he was unstoppable energy, a hurricane of physical comedy, a figure whose every entrance demanded attention. He tumbled, he flailed, he exploded across stages and screens with a joyous abandon that seemed effortless. Fans saw vitality, humor, and exuberance, but few glimpsed the pressure that simmered beneath the surface. Years of personal struggle, battles with substance abuse, relentless stress from fame, and the weight of expectation had quietly eroded the life of a man who always appeared larger than the room he entered. Inside that quiet Chicago apartment, far from the laughter and applause, the very space that should have been a sanctuary became the setting of a devastating truth. Here, in the stillness, the chaos of his inner life finally caught up with him. The irony was bitter. The man who made millions laugh, who seemed to control every performance, who brought structure and timing to every sketch, could not hold together his own life. The headlines would call it an accidental overdose, a shocking twist of fate. But the more haunting story lay in the contrast between the public joy he created and the private darkness he endured. And it is here, at the intersection of laughter and silence, that Chris Farley's story begins. Not on the stage, not in the spotlight, but in a quiet apartment where the world first realized that someone who had always seemed untouchable could be gone in an instant. The shock, the disbelief, the mourning, and the whispers of tragedy would echo for decades, reminding everyone that behind the laughter, there can always be darkness unseen. The man who brought joy with every tumble, every flail, every exaggerated movement, was now gone. And the silence he left behind was heavier than any laugh he had ever provoked. Chris Farley was born on February 15, 1964, in Madison, Wisconsin, into a family that cherished energy, humor, and larger-than-life personalities. From an early age, he displayed an uncanny ability to make people laugh, often turning everyday situations into theatrical moments that left classmates and family members in stitches. While he was exuberant and magnetic, there were early signs of the pressure he would later carry, an intensity in everything he did, a need to perform, to be noticed, and to excel. His childhood photos reveal a boy already bursting with physicality, already experimenting with the gestures and expressions that would one day define his comedic style. Family and friends remembered him as endlessly charming, yet privately he was introspective, navigating the same insecurities that would later intertwine with fame and substance struggles. During high school, Chris gravitated toward theater, quickly establishing himself as a performer who could command the attention of an entire room. His physical comedy, expressive face, and timing were unmatched even among older students. Teachers noticed both his brilliance and his occasional intensity, seeing glimpses of the performer who would someday hold entire sketches together with precision and chaos alike. After graduation, he pursued further training at the Goodman School of Drama, honing the craft that would make him Hollywood's physical comedy icon. Farley's early years were marked by a duality: the extroverted, unstoppable performer the world would come to love, and a young man quietly wrestling with self-doubt and a drive that could be overwhelming even for him. It was with the Second City and later the Groundlings in Los Angeles that Chris's raw talent found a stage worthy of his energy. Here, he learned not just to perform, but to structure performance, to anchor the chaos while still appearing wild, to let others shine while ensuring the sketch landed perfectly. Fellow comedians recalled how he could enter a scene, explode with movement, and somehow make everyone else's timing feel natural. These early experiences were formative, teaching Chris the discipline behind his apparent abandon and laying the foundation for his future as a beloved, larger-than-life presence on Saturday Night Live. The seeds of both his success and his personal struggles, his intense drive, reliance on performance for validation, and eventual susceptibility to the pressures of fame, were planted in these formative years. Even as he delighted audiences, the tensions that would later culminate in tragedy were quietly growing beneath the surface. Chris Farley's rise to fame was explosive, almost as theatrical as the energy he brought to every stage. By the late 1980s, his performances at the Second City and the Groundlings had caught the attention of Hollywood, and in 1990, he joined the cast of Saturday Night Live. From the moment he appeared on screen, Chris became an unforgettable presence. Audiences were captivated by his unique combination of physical comedy, wild energy, and impeccable timing. He could tumble across the stage, launch into a flurry of exaggerated gestures, and still somehow make every line land perfectly. His performances seemed effortless, yet behind the scenes, Chris's discipline and understanding of comedic structure were precise. He was not merely chaotic. He had learned how to anchor the chaos, to make everyone else shine while holding the sketch together like a conductor leading a frenzied orchestra. At SNL, Chris created iconic sketches that are still remembered decades later. Characters like Matt Foley, the motivational speaker who lived in a van down by the river, became cultural touchstones, immortalizing his ability to combine absurdity with pathos. His talent was not limited to SNL. In films like Tommy Boy, 1995, and Black Sheep, 1996, he brought the same larger-than-life energy to the screen, translating physical comedy into cinema while maintaining a human vulnerability that made audiences relate. In every scene, whether on television or in movies, Chris was magnetic. The public adored him, critics praised him, and fellow performers revered him as someone who could elevate the work of everyone around him. He had become the embodiment of joy and irrepressible energy, the face of comedy itself. Yet behind the laughter, cracks were beginning to show. The very qualities that made Chris Farley so compelling on stage, the boundless energy, the need to perform, the intensity, also carried a shadow. His reliance on alcohol and prescription drugs to maintain performance stamina and cope with stress had begun to spiral into addiction. Reports from colleagues revealed that he sometimes arrived at rehearsals exhausted, struggling to maintain focus, even as he pushed himself to deliver his trademark exuberance. Fame amplified pressures that were already present: weight struggles, media scrutiny, and the constant demand to be funny at all times. Chris's private life was increasingly unstable, a stark contrast to the vibrant, larger-than-life figure adored by millions. The physical comedy that once seemed a pure expression of joy became intertwined with his personal struggles. Each tumble, each exaggerated fall on stage carried echoes of the inner turbulence he could not escape. Interviews occasionally revealed glimpses of self-doubt and frustration, subtle cracks beneath the confident, high-energy persona. Friends and collaborators noticed mood swings, bouts of anxiety, and the relentless compulsion to perform, even when exhausted. The very skill that made him extraordinary, the ability to disappear into a character, to anchor chaos, to make others shine, was simultaneously a source of internal pressure. Chris was giving everything to the world on stage, but the stage could not save him from the pressures of life off it. By the mid-1990s, the convergence of fame, addiction, and personal stress had created a dangerous imbalance. While audiences celebrated every performance, the private reality grew darker. Attempts to manage weight and health fluctuated with demanding schedules. Substance use, initially a coping mechanism, became entwined with the daily rhythm of performance. The apartment that would ultimately become the site of his death had witnessed these private battles long before the public knew. Friends reported a man both generous and generous-spirited, yet trapped in cycles that no laughter could break. He was at the peak of his fame, yet paradoxically, the pressures surrounding him were at their heaviest. The irony was tragically cinematic. The performer who could make chaos appear controlled, who could turn tumbling and shouting into art, could not stabilize his own life. And then came the night that would shock the world forever. The man whose energy had lifted audiences across the nation, who had anchored sketches and films with precision and charisma, succumbed to an accidental overdose of cocaine and morphine. It was a private moment that became a public tragedy. The headlines splashed his name across newspapers. The television reports replayed images of his smile, of his boundless movement, juxtaposed against the stark stillness of his apartment. Fans, colleagues, and the public alike were left grappling with disbelief. How could someone so irrepressible, so joyous, so indispensable to comedy be gone? The contrast between public exuberance and private struggle crystallized the tragedy, creating a narrative as heartbreaking as any sketch or scene he had performed. Chris Farley's legacy during this period is one of contradictions. The energy and joy of a performer at the height of fame, and the creeping darkness of a life under pressure. Part 3 captures both, the luminous rise and the shadows beginning to creep in, preparing viewers for the inevitable crash. His comedy, his performances, and his persona were legendary, but they also hid the reality of personal turmoil, setting the stage for the devastating events that would conclude his story. It is here, in the convergence of triumph and fragility, that audiences begin to understand the weight behind every laugh, every tumble, and every scene Chris Farley graced with life. The news of Chris Farley's death sent shockwaves across Hollywood and the comedy world. Fans gathered outside theaters, SNL studios, and public spaces to mourn the sudden loss of a man whose energy had touched millions. Television networks replayed clips of his most iconic sketches, while newspapers ran memorials reflecting on his unparalleled contribution to physical comedy. His colleagues, many of whom had leaned on him to carry scenes, spoke openly about the emptiness left behind. Chris had been more than a performer. He had been a foundation, a presence whose absence revealed the fragility hidden behind the laughter he created. The city of Chicago, where he had been found, became a somber stage for grief, with reporters, cameras, and neighbors all witnessing the shock of a life so public, yet so private in its struggles, coming to an end. Tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment industry. Fellow comedians recalled his boundless generosity, his ability to make anyone feel seen, and the way he could transform even the simplest sketch into a spectacle of controlled chaos. Clips from Saturday Night Live, Tommy Boy, and Black Sheep were replayed countless times, now tinged with the bittersweet awareness of mortality. The man who had once tumbled and shouted to make audiences laugh now existed only in memory, and each tumble, each exaggerated gesture, carried a new weight of sadness. Fans shared photographs, stories, and personal reflections online, creating a collective remembrance that extended far beyond television and film. The laughter he generated had always been public, but the mourning was now universal, private, and shared simultaneously. Yet amid the grief, Chris Farley's legacy endured. His approach to comedy, his physicality, timing, and dedication to lifting everyone around him remains a benchmark for performers to this day. Aspiring comedians study his sketches to learn how to balance chaos with structure, to disappear into a character while still controlling the room. Farley's larger-than-life presence, once a source of joy and excitement, now stands as a cautionary tale of talent intertwined with vulnerability. Documentaries, interviews, and retrospectives continue to celebrate his career, ensuring that new generations understand both the brilliance of his performances and the human fragility behind them. His story illustrates the stark contrast between public triumph and private struggle, a duality that lingers in the collective memory of fans and colleagues alike. In the end, Chris Farley's life and death are inseparable. The man who made millions laugh, who gave energy, life, and joy with every tumble and every gesture, left behind a silence that no applause could ever fill. His tangibility as a performer may have ceased, but the echoes of his presence remain, through video clips, sketches, and the memories of those who watched him perform. The world remembers Chris Farley not just for his wild humor, but for the profound humanity underlying every act, every line, every fall. His laughter lives on, yet the absence reminds us of the fragility hidden behind even the most exuberant joy. The curtain has fallen, but the imprint of his life, both luminous and tragic, continues to resonate, leaving audiences to wonder, reflect, and feel the bittersweet shadow of a comedy legend lost far too soon.